Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. This is the story's 11th episode, in which Iruka takes Mizuki's shuriken to the back instead of Naruto. Naruto loses control and prepares to unleash the Kyuubi, but he is stopped by the hand of his hero before he can tear off the seal. Yondame's Hokage. To show your support, like and subscribe. Let's get this show going. The competitor's box was more of a balcony really, sandy stone jutting out above the battlefield, giving those waiting to fight a closer view of the action than was strictly comfortable. It was a design choice made in a time where these exams have considerably more bloodshed, and foreign villages would refuse to send their stronger candidates. It gave Konoha a chance to demonstrate their dominance and intimidate their rival villages in close quarters. This mindset of course had become less prominent among the villages after the horrors of the previous war. Now, the Chunin exams were an experiment in peace, or at the very least a way of deterring others from waging war against you. Naruto very nearly snorted. It was a nice idea that typically, other villages have quickly found a way to exploit in order to wage war against Konoha. He glanced around the box. Competitors huddled together in village groups and realized that he wasn't the only one who felt tense. You could cut the atmosphere in the room, dense and thick, with a kunai. Temari and Gaara stood in one corner, everybody else stood as far away from the pair as they could possibly manage. Temari was trying to maintain the cocky smirk that had never really left her face since the start of the exams, but Naruto had seen her hands shaking earlier, and she had kept them tightly folded for most of their time in the box. Gaara had alternated between staring hungrily at Naruto, as well as Sasuke, his next opponent. The rest of the box was Konoha Shinobi. If he didn't know full well what Gaara was capable of, he might have suggested an ambush then and there. That approach might work, but it'd probably get everyone in their box that wasn't carrying a tailed beast inside them killed. Hana was leant against the wall beside him, also trying to act as though she were relaxed. She might have fooled the others, but Naruto knew her well enough to know better, especially having spent a month training with her. She was as terrified as he was. Ino for her part, also hung close, although she hadn't said much of anything. If Naruto wasn't certain that she hadn't been told, he would honestly have guessed that she knew it was coming. Sasuke and Sai stood together, yet apart at the same time. Sasuke looked quiet and focused, if not sullen, but had been shooting him the occasional glance that Naruto couldn't quite read. However, he couldn't find the usual venom or disdain that the Uchiha seemed to reserve just for him. Technically that was an improvement, but clearly something between them had changed, he just couldn't work out exactly what. Sai on the other hand, stood out like a sore thumb. He had come dressed in all black, wearing a gray vest that was a little like a cross between a Chunin vest and Anbu armor. His whole body seemed taut and ready to move in an instant, but his face wore that eerie, permanent smile that it always seemed to. He shuddered and turned towards the final member of their group. Hyuga Neji was no different to how he was a month ago, arms crossed and an arrogant, furious glare carved his face into hard lines. Its focus hadn't left Naruto since he had arrived. He still wasn't sure how he felt about the Hyuga. He was still furious with the boy for what Naruto truly believed to be an attack intended to kill Hinata, but he also pitied Neji immensely for his situation and the things the branch family's brightest talent had been through. Add to that the fact that they were being forced to fight immediately prior to their village being invaded, and you had a striking emotional cocktail. Uzumaki, Naruto and Hyuga Neji, please report to the battlefield. The tannoy blared around the stadium, silencing the crowd to an uncomfortable degree. Neji gave him one last baleful look before stalking to the balcony railing and leaping to the stadium floor. His arrival was greeted by a muted round of applause before it quickly fell to silence once more. He had a feeling he knew why. Naruto made to move and follow his opponent, but Hana placed a hand on shoulder just as he did. I know I don't need to give you any advice, you know what you're doing. Just. She trailed off, looking stricken for just a moment, and Naruto was struck by the fact that the next time they spoke, they would be doing so in a world completely changed. If they spoke again at all. Just be careful, Naruto. He smiled as reassuringly as he could manage and placed his hand gently upon hers. You too, Hana. All lovebirds, how adorable. Do be careful, Blondie, be a shame if anything happened. Temari's mocking sing-song voice made Naruto turn on his heel towards the girl, his face tempered steel. He said nothing, he didn't need to. The girl's smirk twitched then fell away, exposing the fear underneath. Naruto shifted his eyes to Gaara, unmoved, before turning his attention to the battlefield. Anticipatory silence turned to hushed whispers as he landed smoothly in the arena. He tried to tune them out, but he couldn't help but notice the thousands of hushed conversations that were happening all the way around the arena. Jiraiya had warned him that this would happen, that it could never be so straightforward as the villagers all immediately treating him decently now that they knew he was the son of the fourth. Some would still hate him for what he was, some would seek to exploit the knowledge regardless of what they thought of him. Others would bounce straight from believing he was the Kyuubi reborn all the way to the idea that he was the Yondaime reborn, never once in that process seeing the real Naruto past what it was they envisaged he should be. Only a very small number would truly open their minds to the real Naruto at first, and he would have to earn their respect just the same as he would if nobody knew. He focused on Neji in front of him, arms crossed and impatience written across his face. Naruto smiled easily. The whispers made him uncomfortable, but he'd take pleasure in making sure Neji was too. "How's it going, Neji?" he asked casually, arms stretched out behind his head as if he were the most relaxed person in the village. "Viciously attacked any relatives recently?" He could see the snarl before it erupted from Neji's mouth as the boy's Byakugan activated subconsciously. "How dare you, an outsider, pass judgment on that which you cannot understand?" He sucked a breath in through clenched teeth and Naruto almost smirked. He had clearly been holding on to this since their words after his fight with Hinata. "How dare you, a privileged son of this village, the son of the Hokage himself, speak as if you understand what it is like to be in my position. To be trapped under the inescapable burden of the branch family." Naruto couldn't help himself. It was as if Neji's words struck right at the tight knot of tension caught in his stomach. All his fear, anger and anxiety that he was keeping back until the fighting was done, he could hold it back no more. He laughed. It was a deep, guttural laugh straight from the deepest part of his chest. He laughed so hard that tears came to his eyes and he very nearly buckled over. He laughed so hard in fact, that he almost didn't notice the referee, a special jonin using a senbon like a toothpick, roll his eyes and begin the match. Neji lunged forward and despite nearly frothing with rage, the one-handed Juken strike to Naruto's chest was textbook perfectly executed. His eyes widened in shock as blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. Neji was fast and then he burst into a cloud of smoke. Naruto blinked from his position, still leaning casually against the balcony railing in the spectator's box. The Byakugan was an incredible dujutsu, but it had its limitations, and most of those were down to the user themselves. They could still be tricked, could still be misdirected, and Naruto's provocation had meant Neji hadn't noticed that the real Naruto hadn't come down from the balcony at all. Still, the Hyuga had been much faster than Naruto had expected, and he knew that as much as he wanted to get a little payback against Neji, winning would have to be enough. He couldn't afford an injury here. He funneled a sliver of chakra to the palms of his hands and touched them to the sides of his armor, activating a pair of storage seals and pulling a kunai from each of them with a slight smile. He had learned a lot this past month with Jiraiya. His master had been able to devote a lot of time to him, and Yugao and Hana had made sure to push him whilst the old pervert had been absent. It was time to put all that work into practice. Leaping soundlessly from the balcony straight at Neji, he threw both kunai towards the boy, not entirely focused on his aim. Just as Neji began to smirk at his poor throw, Naruto formed the hand seals for the cage bunshine and two kunai became a storm of them raining down on the Hyuga. Neji's eyes widened and he hastily began the rotation required for the Hakushu Kaiden, spinning on the spot and forcing a stream of chakra from his palms. The jutsu formed a spinning dome of chakra that could repel most attacks. It was high-level ninjutsu, and Neji being able to perform it given that he likely hadn't been taught it by anybody was impressive. His kunai bounced off and away from Neji harmlessly, but Naruto had timed his leap perfectly. He landed just as Neji came out of his rotation and aimed a vicious thrust with his Sansetsukan at the disorientated Hyuga that he just barely managed to dodge. Neji was now stuck backpedaling though as Naruto pressed his advantage with a flurry of bojutsu strikes with his weapon. It was a tactical choice that Hana had recommended as much as he trained with a weapon. Naruto's first instinct was to use his body in combat, but fighting a Hyuga demanded he keep a distance that prevented Neji from sealing his tenketsu as they exchanged blows. He delivered a thrust, into a side that forced Neji to hop back even further that allowed Naruto the space to swing his weapon around and sweep at the Hyuga's legs. It worked, but Naruto felt a rush of triumph anyway as Neji stood on the replicated kunai. It burst into smoke and another Sansetsukan wielding Naruto burst forward, landing a savage blow at Neji's head, intending to knock his opponent unconscious with as little damage as possible. The staff hit the Hyuga with a sharp crack and he was sent tumbling to the floor. Naruto paused, unwilling to press a comrade that was already on the floor, and allowed the Hyuga to stand, blood now seeping down his face from the underneath the center of his hitayate. This made Naruto start, as he had aimed his strike for the side of his head to avoid the protection of the metal plate, but the ring and smallest finger of Neji's left had bent at an unnatural angle solved the mystery. He had actually managed to get a guard up and redirect his blow to keep himself in the fight. For his part, Neji was at least looking at Naruto in a different light now, guarded and calm, well aware he was facing an opponent capable of defeating him, and of the need to keep his cool. Perhaps it was time to disrupt that a little bit. "Do you want to know why I laughed just now, Neji? It wasn't at you, not really." The boy's eyes narrowed angrily at that, but he made no move, so Naruto pressed on. "It was because you called me privileged despite the fact you know next to nothing about me, other than that I graduated dead last and that I'm the son of the fourth, a fact which, by the way, I only found out after I graduated." Neji's eyes did widen in surprise at that fact, which made Naruto chuckle humorlessly. Insane, right? The son of the legendary fourth Hokage in the village this whole time, and he didn't even have a clue. Only a few people did. The truth is, Neji, what it's like to live with an inescapable burden, a curse that haunts your every move, that taints you in the eyes of everybody around you? That seems to give everybody a right to treat you like shit through no fault of your own, as if you were being punished just for being born? Neji, I understand what that's like better than you could possibly imagine. He saw Neji about to protest angrily, so he flared his chakra in a concentrated burst, letting it pour out of him and surround him in a display of power only visible to those with a dojutsu like Neji or Kakashi's. Neji gasped and took an involuntary step back at the sight of it. What is that chakra? You see, Neji, I have a mark that cannot be removed or erased like you. Only death will remove it from me. My father couldn't kill the Kyuubi that he died fighting, only seal it within a newborn infant child. Within me. That little fact, the village did know. And having just lost their Hokage and knowing who the culprit was inside. Want to take a guess at what growing up as a poor and orphaned Uzumaki Naruto was like? In fact, I bet you don't have to guess, do you? You've lived it too, at least partially. Neji looked shell-shocked, and Naruto finally became aware that the audience had gone silent as well. Naruto wasn't sure how much they could hear, but if his words had given a few of them something to think about, well, good. He was ready to move past his childhood and let go of some of the hate and anger he had penned back all those years. That didn't mean he had forgotten it had happened though. Difference is, Neji, I haven't decided to take out my anger by nearly killing my comrades, on my family. She is the sign of the main house, she represents everything. Aha, stop making excuses, Neji. Naruto interrupted, voice hard. From what I hear, your primary responsibility in the clan is to protect and guard her. You better than anyone know just how kind Hinata is, and just how far she would go to help you if she could. You didn't go that far because you hate her, you did what you did because you're angry that you're too weak to change your situation yourself. Neji scowled but looked away, unable to meet his eyes and deny what Naruto was saying. He knew what he was talking about. After all, very few of his pranks had been for the fun of it. After a moment, he brought his focus back round to Naruto and settled into a ready stance. One of the greatest powers of the Hyuga is that of being able to see truth. One of our greatest weaknesses is that this makes us vulnerable to deception from without and from within. To deny the truth in your words would be to fall prey to that weakness more that I already have. But for now, Uzumaki-san, we have a match to finish. You do realize I'm still going to kick your ass for what you did to Hinata, right? He asked, joining Neji in a ready stance. The Hyuga narrowed his eyes a touch. It would appear that self-deceit is not only a weakness of the Hyuga. And with that, his Byakugan flared and the Jonan dashed forward with a lithe grace that belied his speed directly at Naruto. The blonde's hands moved by instinct, knowing he needed to keep Neji at a distance, flashing through hand seals. Doten, Doryu Taiga. The ground beneath and directly in front of Neji, softened before losing its firmness together, melting away into a pool of sloppy mud intended to trap and slow down an opponent. Had he mastered the jutsu, the ground would have collapsed into mud instantly. But he had worked on a variety of ninjutsu with Jiraiya and Yuigao over the past month with the intent of broadening his repertoire, and the moment before it took full effect gave Neji the chance to avoid the trap by leaping adroitly over it. Fortunately, getting Neji in the air was a good enough outcome to keep the close combat specialist at bay. Two discarded kunai either side of Naruto's jutsu burst, and a pair of shadow clones burst forward, already prepared with lightning whips aimed towards the Hyuga. Neji, momentum all heading forward, somehow managed to twist in the air, avoiding one whip and deflecting the other with a chakra-covered bomb. However, the move took most of the Hyuga's concentration and he missed the one-handed seal Naruto performed as he dodged. He landed neatly in front of Naruto, inside his guard fully. You're clever with your ninjutsu, but once I'm this close you're no match. Hakiraku Juion Sho. 8 trigrams, 64 palms. The legendary finishing move of the Hyuga. For Neji to be able to perform both this and the Kaiden at his age was utterly outrageous. However, he had forgotten just who it was he was dealing with. Naruto's Cage Bunshine, substituted in as Neji had dodged the lightning whips, managed to half-smirk even as the first palm landed and Neji's world exploded into electric blue light. Naruto let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding as Neji collapsed, twitching to the floor. The deception had worked. The Byakugan saw almost everything, but its wielder can only focus on so much at once. Overwhelm them with multiple threat and the incredible visual prowess is limited by the wielder enough that they can be deceived. Added to that the fact that he had split his chakra evenly among his clones so that Neji couldn't tell that they were clones, let alone the fact that the seals that each clone wore were lightning traps that would activate when struck, shocking the person who did so. Best of all, Neji would be up again and practically fighting fit with a few minutes of treatment. He'd need to be, after all. He walked over and crouched down next the still conscious Hyuga, who looked at him, grimace from the pain etched onto his face. "How?" he asked, voice strained. "How do you keep going, knowing your own fate?" Naruto crouched down next to the Hyuga so that he could speak over the noise of the crowd. "Because fate is just an excuse, Neji. Because I refuse to let the burdens I carry drag me to the floor." He glanced towards the crowd. "Because they said I couldn't and there was no way in hell I was going to prove them right about me. That got me about as far along as you, but just proving that people who treat you like dirt wrong isn't enough by itself. That's pettiness, not conviction. For me, it was finding a reason more important than all of it. It was about finding something to protect that was worth putting my life on the line for. This village is the home of the people I love and I'll die protecting them." Neji didn't respond, but his eyes wandered out to the audience, searching out something that Naruto couldn't see with his own eyes. Something worth protecting. Naruto left Neji to the medicament and returned to the competitor's box. It wasn't quite the kicking that he had meant to mete out, but for some reason, he felt good about it anyway. Gaara's sister, Temari, went up against Sai next. It was an interesting match if only for the fact that Sai was very clearly not a Genin. The boy that shared a name with Dansu ran rings around Temari's usually devastating Fuuden and Jutsu using a variety of his admittedly unique ink-based techniques. Sai, of course, had also beaten Kiba a month ago, but the gap between them hadn't been close to this large. Sai had been holding out on them. Given what he knew about Dansu, this wasn't exactly surprising, but it was interesting the boy was choosing now to stop holding out. Was Dansu preparing to join the effort to save the village? The Sandaime hadn't thought he would, not at least, until there was absolutely no other choice. He had invested too much into keeping his root division well hidden. Of course, an ugly part of his brain suggested, he could always know something that the Sandaime didn't. He winced as Sai used a kata ninjutsu on Temari's fan, turning it into what was essentially now just a big metal stick. Tactically, it was a great move, but the horror on the girl's face told him that it had been more than just a weapon to her. She was an enemy, of course, but even knowing that, he struggled to quash the empathetic side of him, at least until she was actually guilty of something. Next, Sasuke and Gaara made their way to the arena floor and Naruto felt his stomach tighten. He could see next to him that Hana's knuckles were bone white from clenching her fists. Jiraiya had been pretty confident Gaara would be the signal that would begin everything. The match started reasonably tamely. Sasuke had gotten a lot stronger in the months since the forest, no doubt thanks to Kakashi's tutelage. He was fast, agile and smart, and Gaara was having a hard time pinning him down. Sasuke had learned the lessons of Rock Lee's ill-fated match with the Tsunade Jinchuriki, and had the added benefit of the Sharingan keeping him clear of Gaara's instinctive sand attacks. Much like Rock Lee, however, the last Uchiha was having the exact same problem of actually damaging Gaara. Lee had used the 8 gates to increase his strength and speed enough to bypass Gaara's defenses, only losing the fight because his own body couldn't keep up with the strain. Sasuke too realized this, using a series of kata ninjutsu to create room between him and Gaara. However, Naruto noted with interest, the Uchiha was smirking despite the issues he was having. He has a plan then. He watched with interest as Sasuke's hands blurred through a series of hand seals, before he grasped his own wrist and sparks began to fly in a blinding display of electrical power. If nothing else, the noise was impressive, a high-pitched shriek echoing around the arena like a flock of screeching birds. Chidori. An rank assassination jutsu. He had seen Kakashi use it once before on their first crank mission. The Sharingan user had come up with it himself. Sasuke broke into a dash, the violently flaring chakra encasing his arm destroying the ground as he ran, straight towards Gaara. The red-haired shinobi's eyes widened, recognizing the danger, and sand began to swirl around him, forming a rock-solid sand cocoon. The Uchiha never faltered, even as spikes burst forth from Gaara's shell, forcing him to weave through them to get at his enemy. He thrust his new jutsu at the shell, and for a moment, it looked as though the sand would hold strong. The crackling chakra flared as Sasuke poured even more chakra into it, and the Chidori burst through to the target within. Gaara's scream pierced the cheering of the crowds, silencing them and sending ice rushing through Naruto's veins. Then he felt it intimately familiar to him and yet, like nothing he had ever felt before. A tainted, creeping and overwhelming power, oozing over the arena and making the hair on his arms stand on end. "I'm bleeding. Mother. The blood, mother. It hurts." Gaara's howl was panicked, frantic, as though the idea of bleeding was entirely alien to him and he just couldn't understand what had happened to him. Make it stop. Make him pay. Then, Gaara's chakra exploded violently, visible plumes of sickly energy, cascading power, erupting from the sphere, even as a monstrous claw burst forth and hammered at Sasuke, forcing him to retreat hurriedly. Almost simultaneously, explosions rocked the arena, enveloping the upper spectator boxes in a ferocious inferno. It was only then that Naruto realized he was getting drowsy and hurriedly broke free from a genjutsu that had already placed much of the audience under its spell and asleep. He looked out across the arena aghast, as suddenly Sound, Suna and Konoha forces were engaged in violent struggles everywhere he looked. Already, the dead were beginning to litter the stands and he could see that some of the audience had been caught in the crossfire of the battles around the arena. Fire and lightning flashed, blade met blade and weapons flew in a cacophony of violence that stopped Naruto's breath right in his throat, whilst explosions began to sound out from even further away and smoke poured into the sky above the village hidden in the leaves. All around him he knew, inescapably, that Konoha burned. Screams and shouts rang through Naruto's ears as the carnage unfolded around him, the war cries and death throes of the soon-to dead. His eyes had somehow picked out Kakashi-sensei in the melee, never fighting fewer than 3 enemy combatants at a time, and he found himself numbly counting the number of wide-eyed, terrified bodies the man left in his wake. He tried to remind himself that any of those corpses would have cut his, or any of his friends' throats given half a chance, but it was difficult to look into empty eyes, no matter who they had belonged to, and justify the act of stealing the life from them. An explosion rocked their balcony, a wayward fireball the cause, and Naruto was ripped from the shock straight into pure panic as he remembered the Suna shinobi that were in the box with them. He span on the balls of his feet, and saw quickly that Kankuro and Temari were stood as he had been stock still, and watching the unfolding horror unable to shake themselves from it. He should kill them, he knew. A kunai for each of their hearts, before they had the chance to join the fray. He had promised himself that he wouldn't hesitate again. Empty, lifeless eyes flashed before his own. "Hana, Ino!" he barked, turning his back on Gaara's siblings. The pair started and looked at him, both as wild-eyed as he knew he was. They were all in shock. Only Hana's partners stayed alert and at the ready, hackles raised, to defend her. He needed to keep his composure, so much relied on him doing his duty today. "Hana, you're a medic, so make sure to stay out of the actual fighting as best you can if possible. Try and start evacuating some of the civilians until a Jonin finds you and tells you otherwise. Treat whoever you can, but you know better than I do, try not to get hung up on lost causes. However much it might hurt you, because I know it will. Beyond that, you know the plan we made with Jiraiya-sensei Ino." He followed on firmly, and he could see that she was starting to calm, starting to regain her mental footing. "If you can, find your squad or your sensei and report to them. If you can't, find any other Jonin you can. They should order you away to an evac point. Jonin aren't supposed to be on the front line. We guard the evac points." Both nodded, focused and began to move, and Naruto himself hopped up onto the balcony railing to better survey the battlefield. It was pure, unadulterated chaos. Neither side had managed to form battle lines, and the fighting was a mess of shinobi of different allegiances stumbling into each other. Konoha ninja were outnumbered though. The Sandaime had only stationed a particular selection of their forces here. A selection of the elite that would take the bulk of the initial attack here at the stadium in order to give the Jonin and civilians a chance to evacuate. True enough, the likes of Kakashi and Might Guy were too high profile of a target for many to ignore. There were very few enemy combatants who would turn up the opportunity to go down in history as the one who managed to take down the legendary Sharingan no Kakashi. The other Jonin had already gotten moving as well. Shikamaru was staying close to Asuma, using his shadows to strategically slow down those attacking the Jonin. Kiba had recognized that his brand of fighting wasn't useful here where so many of the enemies were stronger than they were, and instead was systematically waking civilians with Shino and guiding them away from the chaos. The Aburame for his part was acting as Kiba's guard. Presumably, he was using his Kikai insects as an early warning system to stop enemies from getting too close. Naruto would have bet money that he also had a considerable number of his colony searching for enemies to subtly rain the chakra from. Every little helps, after all. Finally, his eyes made their way to his own target. Baki stood between the Jonin Proctor and Gaara. The Tsunejin Churiki had left his protective cocoon and was gripping his head, shuddering in pain as though the Ichibi was literally trying to escape through his skull. As it was, his right arm had mutated, and was now a monstrously large, inhuman arm of sand, lined with blue markings. If it wasn't obvious by sight, it'd be made so by the demonic chakra radiating from the boy. He had begun to let his control slip, begun to allow a full transformation into a Baijuo. Naruto couldn't allow that to happen. This was his mission. This was why he carried the burden that he did. He leapt to the floor, and for the first time in a while, he formed the hand seal for Kage Bunshin and concentrated. The battlefield was chaos, but that was where Uzumaki Naruto thrived. The space around him exploded into life as hundreds of Narutos burst into existence. Help in any way you can move. His Kage Bunshin rushed outwards. Just because he had one mission, didn't mean he couldn't help where he could. He himself moved straight at Gaara at a run, only to be forced to roll to the side as a grey-clad sound shinobi leapt at him with a kunai. The woman was fast, and the blade nicked him on the side of his armor. He swiveled on the floor towards the enemy and several more clones phased into existence, one using his back as a springboard to propel itself towards the enemy staff in hand. She sidestepped his clone, straight into the bloodied kunai of Hatake Kakashi. Sharingan still covered, he drove his weapon straight into her throat, and she crumpled boneless to the floor. 32, he said, lone visible eye curved into a smile. Guy will never let me hear the end of it if I lost count. Naruto's mouth moved trying to formulate a response, and the veteran ninja placed his hand upon his shoulder. Good thinking on the clones, Naruto. It's the kind of battlefield support only you can provide. Now, he paused momentarily as two more enemies threw themselves at him, only for Guy to appear without warning in a whirlwind firsts, taking them both down and disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. Kakashi's eye rolled, but he pressed on. This isn't a good place for Jonin to be right now. Hokage-sama briefed us on your role. The Jonin will cover you out of here, but from then on you're on your own. I'll make it official to avoid any debate. Any of the Jonin in your graduating year that you can find are now under your command. Form a team. It will be their job to get you in a position to seal Gaara and support you in a safe way. He paused, and glanced towards the redhead. Gaara was being led away by Temari and Kankuro, Baki covering their escape. You'll have to be quick to track them. I'll do what I can to help, though. He raced through familiar hand seals, and summoned a small, cream-colored pug. Thanks to Jiraiya-sama, Pakun here has Gaara's scent. He'll help you track them. Are your orders understood? Hi. He barked in response, and Kakashi's eye smile disappeared and was replaced by a cold black stare as he turned his attention back to the battlefield. Then move. Old bones were a poor substitute for young. They creaked and groaned and protested every single movement. Any period of exertion was a constant examination of one's willpower, an examination of one's resolve. Even reinforcing himself with chakra, the strain was reaching unbelievable levels already. He really had gotten old. Sarutobi hesitated before rejoining the fray. The roof of the arena had been surrounded by a vivid purple dome, a nigh impenetrable barrier ninjutsu designed to prevent him from getting help or escaping. His heart broke a little more as he considered that all this carnage and death had been done to his village and others, all to allow for an attempt on his life. Orochimaru. Even the name carved deep trenches into his soul. How much pain had that one caused, how much misery. He had tried so hard to reach him, to save him from his own darkness. Jiraiya and Tsunade had too, in their ways. It had been for naught. Whatever demons plagued the man he had thought of as a third son, had proved as immovable as their host's lust for power. He had been lost to them long before Sarutobi had realized it. Too late, always too late. Even when he had been too weak, too lacking resolve to do what must be done. Too weak, always too weak. How much blood is on my hands because of my weakness? How many souls lost? Too many, always too many. His former student had miscalculated, however. He had grown unbelievably strong, true. But he had never tempered that strength with humility, never learned to control his arrogance. I could have taught him that. That, as it had ever been, had been his downfall here. Jiraiya had infiltrated the Hokage's box just as Orochimaru had, and Anbu had dealt with his guard. Now, Orochimaru was trapped in a prison of his own making with both Sarutobi and Jiraiya. Both of his students had long since surpassed him, and it was impossible to say who was the stronger. However, old though he may be, Sarutobi Hiruzen was Konoha's Hokage for a reason. Orochimaru had arranged this precisely to get at him without interference. He watched as his students, once brothers, danced across the tiled roof, a whirlwind flurry of the elements and blows meant to take the other's life. Orochimaru was straining to match Jiraiya. Once, Sarutobi had envisaged that Orochimaru would take his title. He had been wrong about that and a great many other things. Jiraiya had acted the fool in the early days and still liked to play that part when it suited him. Perhaps Sarutobi had allowed that to blind him, in those early days, to how truly great the Toad Summoner was becoming. He had become a wonderful shinobi, ironclad in his resolve, truly kind in his heart. The embodiment of the will of fire. He was every bit Orochimaru's equal in this fight, lacking only his counterpart's hubris. How he wished he had been able to see things as they were when it counted. Jiraiya avoided a gout of fire from Orochimaru, retreating all the way back to him. "Sensei, you don't have to do this. I can take care of Orochimaru. You marshal the village." "No." He interrupted, his voice one of a man who had spent more than half a century issuing commands and brooking no argument. "He is my mistake. I'll not sit back and allow you to clear up my mess. We end Orochimaru, here and now." "That, my dear sensei, is assuming you can." Orochimaru approached, a sickening, too wide smile impressed upon his face. The facade could never hide the tightness around Orochimaru's eyes, not from him. He had not expected to be pushed as much as he had by Jiraiya, most assuredly not before either of them had brought to bear their more powerful techniques. "Come to think of it, I'm beginning to think that fighting the two of you might just be beneath someone of my talents." The smile grew, and Sarutobi felt the beginnings of dread well deep within him. Too confident, far too confident. Hand seal flashed, and Konoha's Hokage readied himself. "Edo Tensei." Uchiha Sasuke tried once more to swallow the resentment that stung at him for being ordered to operate under the command of the Dobi. At least, that was what he pretended he was irritated at. It allowed him to ignore the uncomfortable reality, as they raced through the village hot on the heels of his opponent for the Chunin exams, that the Dobi deserved that command. Naruto's growth had put his own to shame, and the recent revelation about his family had put everything he had thought he knew into a new perspective. It was possible he wasn't as alone as he had thought. Besides, the bodies made his mind conjure images of his family, and he would think about anything over that. Their orders were simple: locate and bring down Gaara of the Sand, whilst keeping him as far away from the village as possible. He didn't understand that last they might cause some damage, but he could see no reason that they couldn't fight Gaara inside of Konoha's walls, given that most of the civilians had been evacuated. Naruto, however, had been insistent and he had been forced to acquiesce. It didn't really matter to him, of course, as long as they did get to fight him. Their journey had been illuminating in many other ways, also. He had realized that Naruto had somehow become incredibly competent prior to this, of course, and he had displayed that to great effect. Sasuke's Sharingan could see how much chakra each of Naruto's Bunshin cost, and he knew full well that he would be incapacitated now had he tried to match the blonde. That rankled at him, even as they fought through their home, Naruto using Bunshin to support the other battles that were occurring. However, it seemed that others had made similar moves. The Inuzuka girl, Hana, was apparently primarily in medic, but her Ninken cut whirlwind threw opposition at Naruto's direction. The two worked well in tandem, moving and fighting around each other in close quarters with alarming ease, and for the first time Sasuke could see exactly what Kakashi had meant by teamwork. He had come to care for his team, of course, but they had never come close to being able to fight like this. Their two other team members, Ino and Shikamaru, were the biggest surprise. Both he had disregarded as a waste of time in the academy, but now they filled their roles well as support ninja, strategically freezing and distracting enemies, allowing for the three heavier hitters of their group to better dispatch those they came against. Sasuke had never seen the value in spending training time with others. It had distracted him from self-improvement, but the benefits were plain. He was an avenger, and he would do so for his clan at any cost. But nothing in that oath of his required him to do it alone. That had been an assumption that he had clutched onto in youthful naivety. He would swoop in and end his brother, lifting the darkness like a storybook hero. But that wasn't reality, and now the image had shifted, a highly organized assassination team moving in and striking at his brother. Dead in a single blow. Efficient and neat. It was at the very least, worth considering. Finally, they reached the village walls. Gaara had left through damage caused in the initial attack, and Kakashi's summon led over the crumbling bulwark without ever pausing to marvel that this much damage had been inflicted upon what was supposed to be the greatest of the villages. The forest had them all on edge. Ambushes were far easier to plan here, but was a nice break. Suddenly, Pakun jerked to a stop, snout in the air, sniffing aggressively. "We're being followed. At least 10, one of which is trailing further he stopped to sniff again. 2 of which are trailing further behind." Shikamaru drew up next to him, frowning. "A double-layer ambush maybe. They're predicting we'll realize we're being followed and then set up an ambush." Their 10th will hang back to break them from any trap we might lay, the 11th will hang back just in case. These will at the very least be Chunin, which presents a real problem. I'm confident myself and Hana could each match a Chunin at the very least, but even presuming we can take one apiece, we're still outnumbered. Naruto added, and Sasuke could see that the only fear he felt was outward, directed at the rest of the team. Just how strong have you gotten, Naruto? I do have a plan, Shikamaru started. I just don't like it. It's more than the rest of us have got, so let's hear it. Sasuke added firmly. First, Hana and Ino move ahead. If we three can't stop them, we can at least delay them. Maybe even make them think we're all there was. Sasuke nodded. This was only logical. If they were killed, the mission would still have a chance at being successful. Just make sure you do not engage Gaara, Naruto demanded firmly, eyes harder than Sasuke had ever seen them. And what if you don't catch up? We still have our duty to Konoha too, Naruto. If you can choose to die for it, so can we. Hana interjected, and the tension in the forest increased exponentially. Naruto narrowed his eyes at his teammate, teeth grinding. Fine. You can engage, but if you can't bring him down before he starts transforming, you retreat. Hana made to interject, but Naruto raised a hand. The second he begins to leak Baiju chakra, you and Ino get the hell out of there. Hana, that's an order. Hana's fists clenched, and it was clear she was considering a response, but all that left her mouth was a muttered, understood. Once that's done, the Nara continued, looking for all the world like he would rather cut his own throat than be out of bed. Naruto and Sasuke hide themselves. They're our heaviest hitters. I pretend to be injured and freeze them, and Sasuke takes care of those I'm keeping trapped. Naruto, you'll have their 10th until we can get in and support. Plan set. Ino, Hana and Pakun set off after Gaara again. Naruto performed Doten, Shinjuzanshu no Jutsu for his Sharingan, allowing them both to lie in wait underground, and Shikamaru took a seat at the base of a tree, using a blood capsule and some field dressing to simulate a kunai wound that he'd tried to patch up as he run. Sasuke took a breath in his pocket of earth, and briefly the image of Shikamaru holding Itachi in place as he thrust Chidori right through the traitor's heart. His Sharingan flared, 3 tomoe spinning wildly in either eye. The real battle was about to begin. Shikamaru heard them before he saw them, 9 figures that leapt from the tree line, their manner infuriatingly casual. They dressed in navy blue shinobi garb, wearing their faces covered in their kunai drawn. He focused on making his breathing ragged, his slight motions jerky and pained. The sweat rolling down his face didn't have to be feigned. There were more than this, one said gruffly, causing the other that had positioned himself directly in front of the Nara to chuckle darkly. Been left to die, have we run? Don't worry, he said, eyes twisting into what was clearly a smile under his mask, we'll make sure to kill them for you. It's the least we can do. Shikamaru scoffed. Appreciated, he said, weakly. Now can you get a move on and do what you have to do? I don't have all day, you know. The man tipped his head back and laughed. Good kid, ready to die with your head held high, like a true shinobi. I respect that. Who said anything about dying? The Nara asked, eyebrow quirked. The man's eyes held a glimmer of confusion, but it was too late for him. It was over in just a few moments. Sasuke burst from the ground, lightning wailing around his fist and plunging it straight through their enemy's chest. The others had only a moment to react, as their reserve ninja burst from the tree line and landed behind the Uchiha, katana drawn. Sasuke never turned, only removed his bloodied arm from the chest of the first and made a dash for the next. This time Naruto erupted from the ground, directly underneath the katana wielder. He was too close, too fast, and the man died with a blade in his throat, choking on his own blood. Another 10 seconds was all it took, and when Shikamaru finally released his hold, 9 bodies collapsed to the floor, joining their comrade already there. He glanced at Naruto and Sasuke, both of them trying not to appear pale and shaken, blood-stained and dead-eyed. Let's move out, before that 11th guy that Pakun smelt catches up. Naruto glanced sideways at Sasuke. This was the last position he'd thought he'd find himself in. He had no idea where he stood with the boy next to him anymore. It was clear Sasuke didn't think of him as the dead last anymore, but equally, it was plain to him that Sasuke didn't afford him any kind of real respect. That said, they had worked together well against the sound shinobi, even if he did have to force back bile every time he thought of it. They had quickly caught up with Hana and Ino, who had engaged Gaara's siblings to prevent anybody from reaching their brother. He was further beyond them and Naruto had to believe they'd tried to hide him. It was a pointless effort. You couldn't hide anything that howled as loudly as Gaara had been. Shikamaru had stayed behind to keep the numbers in their favor, and Naruto and Sasuke had gone on to the Tsunade Jinchuriki. The boy stood ahead of them, clutching his head, body shuddering in seeming agony. The screams, however, had stopped since they arrived. "Sasuke," he said, quietly. "There's a plan. We need to get him the hell with your plan." Sasuke half snarled. "This was my fight, my opportunity to test my limits. I don't care if the Hokage himself put you in charge, you won't be taking this from me." Naruto's jaw dropped a touch at the Uchiha's vehemence. It would never happen to the last Uchiha, of course, but disobeying here and now could get him killed. It was utterly asinine. He had to recognize that they had to work together here. Only he didn't. Sasuke activated his Chidori, Sharingan flared, and charged. "No, don't." But it was hopeless, and Naruto immediately summoned a series of clones to support the Uchiha. They flew forwards, Naruto himself holding back, and Gaara screamed, his eyes black chasms, sand erupting from all around him. From the whirring sand came rock-solid bars, pounding forwards at the Uchiha rhythmically. He destroyed the first with his jutsu, before being forced to release the chakra and focus on dodging. Several more bars thrust at his bunchine, and some were destroyed, forcing Naruto to pour more forwards. He couldn't trust Sasuke in a close-quarters fight with someone using demonic chakra, and if he was forced to start using the Kyubis, he wasn't sure he could trust himself to keep Sasuke out of danger. A rod of sand clipped Sasuke and sent him tumbling away, lip bleeding, and Gaara's screams turned to feverish giggles. "You bleed like you made me bleed," he mumbled between deranged laughter. "Now I'll make you hurt like I hurt." The sand around him dispersed and drew back, forming around Gaara, and the amount of Ichibi's chakra that Naruto could feel skyrocketed. It coalesced around the redhead, sticking to him, wrapping his limbs and body, creating a tormented-looking half-boy, half-sand creature, with thick, bulbous arms and legs. Sickly, tainted power surged and spiraled, and Naruto was spellbound even as Gaara exploded into motion, impossibly fast, torpedoing into the Uchiha in an explosion of sand. "Sasuke!" The scream tore from his throat even as he flew forwards towards them, arm cocked back, palm open. He leapt into the air, and blue energy swirled in the palm of his hand as he caught Gaara in his sights, whipping and twisted until it tightened and condensed into a vivid, whirling sphere of chakra in his hand. "You better be fine, you asshole." Rasengan. His steps echoed methodically through the empty corridor alongside the sound of his walking stick. The stick was all part of his persona, the grizzled old hawk, missing an eye and crippled. He did not need it here. There were no daggers in the dark here, but paranoia was a necessity when you did the kind of things he had done to keep his home safe. Finally he came to a door, and without word, the masked guard slid it open for him and knelt in rightful deference. He passed through the threshold without glancing at the man. On the inside, the room was scarcely lit by two flickering candles on the far wall. He walked through the center of the room to that wall, and heard not a single sound as he did so. He turned to face the dozens of kneeling shinobi, prostrating themselves before him in perfect orderly ranks. Others would be listening out in the village, through communication seals branded into their flesh. Above, our village burns. Above, the weakness of the Sun Daime's philosophy of peace comes home to roost in the blood of our own. His words were quiet, but forceful, every consonant leaving his mouth as though physical blows. It must end. No longer can Konoha be forced to crawl through the mire of politics, growing soft while our enemies sharpen blades behind their backs even as they promise friendship with their mouths. He paused, eyes narrowing. "What I ask of you today is not easy. I ask you to kill your heart, to coppice the great tree of Konoha so that we may build the fires upon which we will reduce our enemies to cinders. Blood must spill this day, that we may rise from the ashes, greater than we have ever been. The tree's roots must lay in the shadows, a necessary evil. This is our role, the necessary evil. Today, Root moves out of the shade to do, as we always have, what must be done. Now, true shinobi of Konoha, do your duty." Shimori Dansu watched as his Root division left the room in a burst of smoke, a act so well practiced it occurred in unison. He would watch his village's strength wilt under the drought of peace and diplomacy no longer. Their enemies had stayed sharp, while Konoha had grown fat and complacent. No more. Today, he would do what must be done, and take the title of Hokage for himself, that his village may grow strong again. "Sarutobi, my friend, I am sorry." He allowed himself that one final sliver of weakness before he hardened his resolve into tempered steel, and allowed his walking stick to collapse to the floor, along with the many bandages he had worn all these years. He would do his duty without a glimmer of weakness, as his Root would do theirs. "Sasuke!" The scream tore from his throat even as he flew forwards towards them, arm cocked back, palm open. He leapt into the air, and blue energy swirled in the palm of his hand as he caught Gaara in his sights, whipping and twisted until it tightened and condensed into a vivid, whirling sphere of chakra in his hand. "You better be fine, you asshole." Rasengan. The tearing vortex of chakra careened into the other Jinchuriki, drilling into his side in a flurry of power. Contact only lasted for a second and the Rasengan's energy reverberated across Gaara, exploding in a shower of light and chakra. Gaara was hurled back, skidding across the forest floor leaving a trail of discarded sand. He hit a tree with such force it splintered, toppling the oak as he came to a stop on the other side. For a moment, Naruto stood in awe of what he had just done. Jiraiya had shown him it in action before, but it was too dangerous for either of them to really cut loose with it in training. His father's jutsu. It was incredible. He shifted his focus to Sasuke. Gaara's attack had been brutal, and the Uchiha lay sprawled out, only semi-conscious. His arm was twisted at the wrong angle, and blood seeped from his mouth and forehead. Naruto winced. He was in bad shape, and he knew full well that Gaara would not have been put down by that attack, not even close. "Sasuke, you stay put. I'll try and keep him clear of here until Hana can come and get you and take you away." "Moron," Sasuke sputtered, more crimson droplets scattering as he coughed out the words. "I'm not going anywhere and you know it. I don't let my comrades die, so you'd best not make me a liar, bastard. I'm gonna kick his ass, and then Hana is going to fix you up so that I can kick your ass for needing to be saved by the damn dead last." Naruto bit back. Sasuke half scoffed, half choked on blood, but before Naruto had time to worry, the amount of Gaara's demonic chakra in the air skyrocketed in unison with an inhuman shriek, like 1,000 nails scratching at 1,000 chalkboards. Without warning, the tree that Gaara had broken came hurtling out of the woods, thrown at such an incredible force that Naruto barely had time to leap out of its way. Thankfully, it sailed over Sasuke's immobile form and shattered against the trees behind them, showering the Uchiha in splintered wood. "It hurts." Gaara's voice cut through all other noise in the clearing, demonic timbre stretching to a fever pitch. "Mother, why can they hurt me? Why?" Gaara staggered back into the clearing, his entire top half enveloped in bulbous sand, taking the shape of the Ichibi's body. Instinctively, Naruto stepped back, eyes wide in horror. Gaara had gone further with the Ichibi's chakra than Naruto had ever dared with the Kyuubi's, and it rolled off him in invisible waves. The awful, tainted energy seeped into everything around him, including Naruto himself, and his own Baiju roared within him, indignant. "How dare you show your teeth to me, brother?" Naruto clutched his head, trying to force the voice that was not his away. His chest burned as the Kyuubi's chakra strained and reached for any weakness in his will, any opportunity to break free. "Get out of my head, Fox. How can I accept a deal when you pull shit like this?" The pressure in his mind receded with such force it took Naruto's breath at those words, leaving only a placid pool of power, limitless at his very center. An echo of deep, cavernous laughter rang in his ears, even as one of Gaara's wrecking ball's arms collided with his head, ringing him like a bell. Naruto's vision went spotty and nausea came upon him, a rowing boat caught in an ocean storm. The calm pool of power within him rippled, and with the world spinning, he reached out his hand and took a scoop of its waters. Power. A furious whirlwind of power surged through him. Untainted. Free of the rage and despair that had been a marker of him using Kyuubi's power until now. He marveled, and tried to ignore the immense satisfaction coursing through him that wasn't his own. "See boy, this is what could be ours if you would but accept my offer. We could achieve anything. Hokage? Together we'd lay the other villages at Konoha's feet and stand unchallenged the greatest Hokage ever to live." Naruto stood, shoulders squared facing Gaara, the damage just caused healed in an instant. The fox's voice slid back into the recesses of his consciousness. He didn't need to be told to know when Naruto was ignoring him after all. Even just that handful is this much power? More laughter echoed through his mind. Gaara cackled. "Yes. We are the same, you and I. Use it. Show me which of our existence is worth more." Naruto moved, and reality around him rushed to keep pace. His fist crashed into Gaara's jaw, lifting the behemoth from the ground up. Bunshine phased into reality around him, landing successive blow forcing him further and further into the air, until finally, a final clone wielding a Rasengan appeared above. He fell onto Gaara, Rasengan sending him spiraling to the floor in a heap. Sand and dust swirled, and Naruto sensed the demonic chakra before he saw Gaara's mutated arm, snaking away from the boy on the ground and streaking at him. He dodged, flickering from clearing to tree branch, and then back to the floor again at speed even he himself didn't fully comprehend. He had never drawn on this much of the fox's chakra before, let alone without any interference from the beast itself. Trouble was, Gaara was drawing on more and more too. He had clambered to his feet, an enormous flat tail now extending outwards behind him. Naruto needed to end this quickly, whilst he was still in control, whilst Gaara was still at least a little himself. He looked back towards Sasuke, and started to see Hana and Ino, lifting the Uchiha over their shoulders. Hana was shooting him a concerned look, and he returned fire with a smile. She nodded, and the trio took off, leaving him completely alone with Gaara. That's one less thing I have to worry about. Everybody else has done their job, it's time I do mine. I wish I'd known you sooner, Gaara. I would have liked to help you, to stop you going down the road that you've gone down, he said, reluctance weighing heavily on his voice. But I can't let that interfere with the knowledge of what you've come to do. You came to my home to try and destroy it, to murder its people. I'll kill you before I let that happen, that's a promise. Gaara stared for a moment, head tilted like a grotesque, curious dog. Then he smiled. Monstrous and wide, thick bulging tongue hanging from his mouth. That's the conviction you're going to use to fight me? That's your purpose, your reason for existing? A pregnant silence hung in the air at his question, and Gaara cut it short with another babble of crazed laughter. Your reason, if weak? You are weak. I will prove it by feeding mother with your blood. The babble raised in tenor, upwards to a cackle, and sand erupted out from Gaara's misshapen form. They took the shape of thousands of sharp needle points. Then, it rained. Naruto dove into the ground as they poured down around him, using the Doden jutsu he'd hidden from the sound Shinobi from to propel himself through the ground towards the Tsunejin Chiriki. He burst from the ground, Rasengan already forming in his palm, directly underneath Gaara. The sphere hit Gaara square, but he stood firm against it. Naruto gritted his teeth and flared his chakra, funneling even more of his power into the jutsu, beginning to force Gaara back. Around them, even more Narutos phased into existence, each with their own Rasengan. Gaara's tail whipped around from behind, sweeping through the summoned clones and spearing towards Naruto. He tried to release his attack to dodge but was too slow, and the appendage caught him in the shoulder. He staggered back, shoulder plate on his armor cracked and blood seeping through even as the tail lashed out again, clubbing him across the head, knocking him to the floor. Naruto climbed to his feet, feeling Gaara channeling yet more of the Ichibi's chakra. Good, I'm glad that wasn't enough to finish you off. Gaara's voice descended into the guttural as he spoke, chakra radiating from him in waves. Naruto gazed back at him. Gaara's legs had now fully changed, and he was now entirely covered in sand, an odd human Tanuki hybrid. Shit, he's nearly fully transformed. Unbidden, the toothy, sinister demon fox smile flickered across his vision, and the pool of power that lay within him began to overflow, water seeping over its edges. He should stop it from happening. Naruto wasn't making this choice, the fox was. But you need the power, or all your little friends will be killed by him. Worst of all, the fox was right. He had to stop Gaara now, before he released his demon fully. There was no choice now, no other option. He allowed the water to overflow, the spilled power escaping into his own chakra system. Clones burst into life around him, and the real Naruto focused chakra into the palm of his hand, waiting. His Bunshine leapt into action. A pair leapt into the trees around Gaara, flashing through hand seals and launching a wave of fire towards him. A separate group mirrored their actions, instead unleashing a torrent of wind chakra. The two waves of attacks met, the air fueling the flames, combining into a storm of fire. Other clones leapt into action, launching ninjutsu at the Tsunejin Chiriki, forcing him onto the back foot. A frenzy of fire and wind, lightning and earth assailed Gaara, his sand defense straining to block the sheer amount of power being aimed his way. Yet more of Naruto's Bunshine erupted from the ground, behind Gaara's defenses barreling into the creature he'd become and exploding on contact. Wave after wave were sent, a sea of power being sent at his enemy. This wasn't how he liked to fight, it wasn't how Jiraiya and Yugao had taught him to fight. But there wasn't room for subtlety here. No opportunity for cleverness. He was almost entirely alone in that he wielded enough power that he could overwhelm Gaara with it. And he needed to. Finally, a collection of clones started to attach themselves to Gaara whilst he was distracted by the torrent of elemental attacks being sent his way, and they detonated at once, sending Gaara careening backwards. Naruto's eyes widened. Gaara's flesh had finally been exposed upon his chest. He pumped chakra into his legs and exploded into motion, seal ready on his right palm. Clones piled on, pinning Gaara in place, preventing him from moving. He thrust his palm forward, touching Gaara's skin, and activated the seal that Jiraiya had designed to seal Gaara's demonic power on contact. The clearing went silent, and Naruto stood awkwardly, unsure about how to respond to the lack of reaction. Gaara had gone stock still, All resistance ceased. "You think to seal me, boy?" Gaara intoned quietly, voice all the more terrifying for just how sane it sounded. Naruto glanced downwards to where he had tried to apply the seal. The skin was dry and rough, cracking at the application of chakra. He was still keeping up his sand armor underneath the transformation. Naruto leapt backwards, desperately backpedaling from the Tsunade and Shuriki as the demonic chakra skyrocketed. His clones exploded themselves in a vain effort to do some damage, even as Gaara began to grow. It hadn't been enough. He had failed. Gaara reached his full height, a towering sand behemoth looming over tall oaks, and cocked his head back. "I'm finally free." Uchiha Sasuke lay humbled and broken, unable to move. He could only watch as the opponent that had broken him and the comrade who had humbled him fought for the fate of Konoha. Naruto the Dead Last was unleashing an unholy torrent of ninjutsu at the monster that Gaara had become. Hundreds of bunshine, swarming and firing off combination ninjutsu towards the sand demon, causing ripples and waves of power to wash over the forest, over him. The demon responded in kind. Cackling, wild laughter belied the devastating nature of the torrents of air that had fired at Naruto. They tore through the forest, ripping trees from the ground with consummate, sickening ease. He couldn't even find it in himself to be angry, not anymore. His eyes could pick out the practice in Naruto's movements, the experience the quality of his ninjutsu proved. Uzumaki Naruto was what Sasuke strove to be. He had worked himself to the bone and reforged himself into a true shinobi. The kind of warrior that could issue justice. Becoming a shinobi had the cruelest of lessons for Sasuke. He had been placed on a pedestal that he hadn't earned by those around him with such conviction. He'd begun to believe it himself. That you had been arrogant was a lesson shinobi usually only learnt in death. He had been lucky enough to have a team that meant he'd lived both of his brushes with it. They had become a strange little family, Team 7. Sakura, who had begun by fawning over him but through her own struggles was now beginning to forge herself into a true kunoichi. Sai, who seemed emotionless but had somehow managed to connect with him in a way that nobody else had. They had put their lives on the line to save him and he knew he would do the same for them. The only thing more unconscionable than allowing Itachi to escape justice for slaughtering his birth family would be allowing the same to happen to his adoptive one. They had lit a match in the shadow, a light so faint and precious that even a faint breath could extinguish it. He would keep it burning, even if it cost him his life. Even if it cost him his revenge. Footsteps arrived beside him and he tensed, ready to use the last moments of his life to combat a new foe but relaxed when he saw who it was. Kami, Sasuke, what the hell happened? It was Ino, bruised and breathless but otherwise unharmed. With her was the Inuzuka girl Hana. Good. They finished the siblings. Now we just have to hope Naruto can hold off Gaara until he coughed, warm blood hitting the ground beside him. Right, Hana said, businesslike. Let's get you stable so we can help Naruto. No. He spluttered with such force it brought on a coughing fit that sent pain lancing through him. Any of us would be in the way. Take a look, they're fighting on another level right now. Both glanced towards the fight and he could see the familiar mix of fear and helplessness as they watched Naruto go up against the monstrosity. He had felt it and he knew they did, too. We can't just let him fight Gaara alone like that. I know Naruto's the best one for it but leave me, he said, with far more conviction than he felt. Go and find Jonin and help for him, it's the only way we can help now. The words burned at his pride as he said them, hurting almost as much as his actual injury. But his pride had held him back for too long. It had tainted his thinking for far too long. Out of any of them, he could have been of use in this fight. He could have made a difference. Naruto was fighting to protect him because he was too weak and full of pride to even listen. Hana stared at him, expression unreadable, and then glanced towards the fight. No. What? It's the only way. If you don't get treatment, you'll die, Uchiha. You might not care but I'd never forgive myself if I left you here to bleed out in the forest. He'd never forgive me either. She scowled. Ino, I know you have some medical training. I'm going to need your help to stabilize Sasuke before we can even think about moving him. But Naruto, the Yamanaka started, uncertain, but Hana shut down the protest. Naruto will hold out against the thing for as long as we damn well need him to, she snapped, green chakra bubbling to life around her hands before she pressed them to her chest and she forced a grin. Put some damn trust in him. He knows we're here and that's all the information he needs. Naruto won't go down and even if he does, he'll take that red-haired bastard with him. Ino nodded, and Sasuke felt the world begin to dim as warm chakra began to seep through him. It was oddly comforting. He wanted to protest, to force them to go and find help. Naruto shouldn't have to put his life on the line for him and his idiotic pride. He wanted fight, he wanted to. Darkness took him. Sarutobi gasped for breath and hauled himself to his feet once more. Blood seeped from wounds on his head and chest, battle dress tattered and scorched. He chanced to glance to the side, where Jiraiya was fighting a 3-on-1 battle against the other 3 Hokage. That boy really had been his greatest feat as a shinobi. How he wished he had invested more in Jiraiya and Tsunade and far less in the halfman before him that he had once loved like a son. When Orochimaru had first activated the Edo Tensei successfully, cold fear had gripped him. He and Jiraiya were old, and their resurrected opponents looked and felt in their prime. However, it had quickly become clear that their power whilst being controlled by Orochimaru, while fearsome, was nothing like the power each man had wielded in life. Furthermore, when Orochimaru was unable to concentrate on the control of the former Hokage, they weakened even further. A plan was formed in which Jiraiya would keep the attention of the cage whilst he dealt with his former student. When Orochimaru fell, his summons would as well. He had misjudged his own abilities. Orochimaru outclassed him significantly and the fight had moved ever closer to the realms of being toyed with and humiliated in opposition to actual combat. Jiraiya on the other hand had fought magnificently, using his sage jutsu to meet the 3 Kage in front of him as an equal. That was a fight that would go down in legend without a doubt. The mighty Jiraiya of the Sannin who fought the 3 greatest Hokage ever to live all at once and the old man, past his prime who failed to defeat their summoner. So Sarutobi-sensei, how long do you think we should keep this charade going for? Do I wait until Jiraiya-kun is utterly exhausted and unable to resist when I cut his throat? Or do I wait for just long enough that he still has some belief that he can defeat me so that I can watch it vanish from his eyes? The man's face twisted into an even more gruesome smirk. Perhaps instead I keep you alive for long enough to watch his precious student squeeze the life from him before I do the same to you, he laughed. Poetic, is it not? Sarutobi steeled himself and a familiar feeling surged through him at Orochimaru's words. Will. Conviction. The surety that no matter how the odds were stacked, he would not allow his village or its people to come to harm. Just the thought summoned strength almost not his own. It was not much at his age, but it was enough for this. It was not Jiraiya's time yet. It was not his village's time. It was his. You seem to be laboring under the assumption that I am out of this fight, his eyes glinted, cold iron erasing all trace of the sympathy and guilt that he felt for his former student. They narrowed. A dangerous mistake. Orochimaru's head keeled back and a cackle filled the ears of the third. Genuine amusement. Old he may be, but Hiruzen Sarutobi still held the title of Hokage. He was being underestimated. Good. Sarutobi began flashing through hand seals. He had made a point to learn these and practice them as he began to grow old. The ninjutsu he was about to perform was an ultimate final gambit for facing an enemy that was overwhelmingly strong and it didn't care for age so long as you had the chakra to perform it. That it could be used to seal a Baiju or its chakra was an added benefit. An extra layer of protection. Orochimaru worked his eyebrow but, arrogance surging thanks to his assumed superiority, he did nothing but watch. Sarutobi almost smirked. Instead, keeping the final hand seal held, he doggedly muttered Fuinjutsu, Shiki Fuin. He felt an overwhelming draw of chakra, almost more than he could take and his surrounding darkened to an unbelievable degree. Had he been fighting alone, he might not have succeeded as he would need to use Kage Bunshin to restrain the cage. As it was, Jiraiya knew enough of Fuinjutsu to take care of the Hokage once their summoner was defeated. In the pitch dark behind him, a looming figure began to fade into existence. Dead-looking and smiling, holding a single blade between grinning, rotted teeth. The Shinigami invisible to all but him. All he had to do now was get close and the god of death would do the rest. It knew his intent and it thirsted for the souls promised for its appearance. Across from him, Orochimaru laughed again. He couldn't see. He had assumed his jutsu had failed. That he was out of chakra. That he had won. This time, Sarutobi did smirk and with a final surge of power and life, flung himself at the man he had once loved like a son. Orochimaru delivered a savage kick to his stomach, knocking the wind from him, but the damage was done. The man let out a desperate, terrified gasp as the Shinigami claimed what was his in his hands and began to pull at his very soul. It's over, he rasped at the Sannin, who for the first time had genuine fear written across his face. The Shinigami will claim both our souls and the terror and pain you have brought the world will end. You have failed, Orochimaru. As a student, as a shinobi and in your quest for immortality. All your ventures are dust cast to the wind by this old man's hand. I succeeded in killing you, he spat back but Sarutobi just smiled serenely in response. This is a death I would choose 1,000 times over. Protecting my village, my people one last time, before my body can protect no more. Your part in it was of no significance and you will go down in history as a minor traitor that was killed by an old man. You have come to nothing, but he was cut off, as Orochimaru's sword that he had discarded at some point during the battle plunged through the Sannin's eye socket. It was held by a dark figure standing over them. Without warning, Sarutobi's jutsu collapsed without its target and the Shinigami howled in frustration, disappearing back to the realm of the dead. The third Hokage, exhausted, fell to the floor and rolled over to greet his savior. "Dansu?" he whispered, feeling true surprise for the first time in a long time. "I am sorry, old friend. I have always seen you as a brother in arms, an equal. But your weakness has brought Konoha to its knees. It's time this village had a strong Hokage once again." Sarutobi could hear Jiraiya's hoarse cry in the distance, heavy in despair. He still had to seal the Hokage Orochimaru had summoned. He would not be able to save him. Pain surged through his chest as Dansu slowly ran him through. He reached up and grasped Dansu's hand as firmly as he could in his last moments and looked up into the visible eye of his assassin. A single tear welled in its corner and Sarutobi smiled at his oldest surviving friend. "For Konoha," he whispered, his world dimming and the light leaving his eyes. "For Konoha." Dansu echoed. 100,000 battles over nearly a century had forged Sarutobi Hiruzen into the god of Shinobi, the ultimate warrior and protector. He could see each of them now, the losses more keenly than the victories. But also he saw those he had saved, the children he had seen grow into fine shinobi or citizens of the Leaf. He saw each celebration and smiling face, his sacrifices and the sacrifices of his shinobi had allowed in all his years. He saw Uzumaki Naruto, standing firm and proud despite everything he'd had to face, ready to protect Konoha, and knew with ironclad certainty that no matter what Dansu intended, that his will of fire had been passed on to Konoha's next generation. The will that had been passed to him decades ago by his predecessors. And then, the third Hokage saw no more. Naruto stood astride Gamabunta, the chief toad summon, as the wind whipped around him, his final card finally in play. Gamabunta was very nearly equal to the demon across from them in size, and one of his webbed limbs rested upon an enormous blade at his hip. Across from him Gano, the Ichibi, grinned malevolently in his direction. Every bone and muscle in him ached, screaming at him to stop. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. "I'm pretty much spent, Gamabunta. Sorry for summoning you, I had no choice," he said between breaths, watching for any sign that the beast across from them was getting ready to launch another attack. "Don't sweat it, kid, we have an agreement after all," Gamabunta's low booming voice rumbled in reply, and Naruto grinned. "Still," the toad began again, "for you to have done so much without summoning me is pretty damn impressive." "It doesn't seem like I've done much at all since he transformed," he answered. "Don't be fooled. The Ichibi is not loose from his vessel. The play possum technique the Sunabrat has used to bring out his demon is only temporary and he can only access so much of his power." Gamabunta quirked an eyebrow at him. "Or did you think a fledgling like you could actually go toe-to-toe with a fully realized Baiju?" Naruto didn't answer and Gamabunta scoffed. "No, kid, but you've done a fine job of draining his reserves from what I can tell. What do you say we put this thing down for good?" "Sounds good to me. You got a plan?" The toad grunted in affirmation. "Hit it with everything you've got, your most destructive attack. We need to damage it so much that the chakra he needs to replenish himself is too much. He's hiding his vessel right now. We need to get to this Gaara, and wake him up." "Got it. Cover me as I go in?" he asked, and the chief nodded with a grin. Naruto took a breath and pulled yet more power from the pool the fox was providing for him. The usual whispers and temptations were once more strangely absent as power flowed through him. The bastard must really want the other Baiju put down. He felt the power and strength flow, but at this point in the fight, his exhaustion remained. His body had almost nothing left to give and he knew full well that he was drawing on far more of the Kyuubi's chakra than he could actually cope with safely. He ignored all of it and leapt from the toad, dashing across the forest canopy straight at the Ichibi. It made to attack him, but Gamabunta leapt over him, sword removing the limb that would have reduced him to a bloody pulp, and it collapsed into a shower of sand. He made the hand seal for Kage Bunshin and forced as much of his chakra as he could manage into preparing the ninjutsu. Taijutsu Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. All around them Naruto's exploded into existence, hundreds of them, all with violently rotating spheres of blue in their hands. Rasengan Barrage. They hurled themselves at the Baiju, who was so busy attacking Gamabunta that he had stopped paying attention at all to Naruto right up until the first of his clones made an impact and the Rasengan's chakra exploded into a violent sand-filled mist. And then the rest began to strike and Ichibi howled. Explosion after explosion began to erupt all over the beast's body and it began to stagger around the forest as volleys of Naruto Bunshin focused on different areas of its body. They started with its legs and the base of its tail, before working their way upwards, a devastating salvo of firepower that laid the Ichibi low. Its sand armor was being reduced to a pale imitation of what it had been, and limbs lay scattered across the forest floor as mountains of sand, desperately trying to reform. Suddenly, Game-Abun leapt into the air and spat a torrent of thick, viscous oil all over the shattered body of the Ichibi even as the Bunshine continued their assault. "Light him up, kid," Game-Abun yelled, and Naruto grinned a tired grin and formed the hand seal for a weak Katen jutsu. It wouldn't take much, after all. He fired the ember towards the Ichibi and a cavernous wall of flame erupted into life where the Baijiu had once been, a raging inferno that burnt nearly white-hot. Naruto watched, wide-eyed as the Ichibi squirmed and screamed and writhed in agony within. "Keep your guard up," the toad shouted over the roaring flames, "he'll keep his host alive inside, and the Baijiu won't leave this world unless Gaara does. Be ready to wake him up." Naruto gritted his teeth and forced himself to watch the grisly sight, waiting for even a hint that Gaara still lived inside. The flames began to recede quickly. Toad oil burned hot and fast. The clearing left behind by the inferno was a blackened husk, and smoke wandered idly upwards from soot-covered tree stumps. The world without warning had been cast into silence, all the wildlife long since fled, and the now absent sounds of battle still rang in his mind, making the eerie quiet ring all the louder around him. In the center of it all, a sphere half-cracked glass, still soft and burning orange at the edge, and half-scorched sand protected Gaara, whose own sand armor was blacked and crumbling. The redhead stood inside it, eyes closed. Still sleeping. Naruto wanted to join him, to do anything other than move. He started walking. Each leaden, dragged footstep took him closer and closer. And around him, Gaara's sand began moving. At first, only a few grains, that slowly grew into a trickle, which built into a winding, creeping stream. He reached Gaara, heartbeat exploding in his ears and body ready to finally give out. He cocked back a fist to deliver the blow that would wake the Jinchuriki and end this fight, and swore violently when the stream of sand clasped his wrists. It wasn't so tight that it could damage him, but no matter how much he fought against it, he couldn't break its hold. He summoned the last of his chakra, every scrap of energy he could manage, and formed it into one final bunshine that weakly puffed into life beside Gaara. For Konoha, he ground out, and the bunshine slugged Gaara squarely in the jaw. The Sinna ninja fell limply to the floor, but so did the remaining sand around them. Ninjutsu finally broke, and Gaara, unconscious. Naruto dropped to his knees in relief, staying awake for just long enough to make sure that it really was over and to see Game-Abun disappear in a hazy explosion of smoke. Yuta Koharu's world had collapsed. There was no other way to describe the events that were unfolding before her and Homura. He stood, much as she did, in the stands of the stadium, slack-jawed as the violence raged around them. It was fortunate they were old. They were not important enough for the sound, or Suna to target. Not whilst there were active Konoha shinobi to worry about. It was how they had been the only ones to notice as Root had shattered the barrier that trapped Hiruzen, Jiraiya and the traitor in with each other. At first, their hearts had soared as Dansu's men had cut down the shinobi that had erected the barrier. There may still have been time to save their old friend. Betrayal was the bitterest of pills to swallow, made all the worse by the fact that it was, at least partly, one of her own making. Below them, the chaos shifted, resonating with the events above. Figures all in black weaved through the clamor of battle, unnoticed until their blades met flesh. These new presences were indiscriminate. Konoha shinobi fell, surprised and screaming, as often as their enemies. "He is eliminating his opposition," Homura said grimly, face hard, and Koharu thought she saw a hint of resignation in his eyes. Now that Dansu has chosen this path, he will not allow any fragment of Hiruzen's way to survive. The price of this coup will be steep, paid for by the blood of our own. Koharu had never been one to wallow in regrets. She had made mistakes aplenty, but she had learned from them and then been sure to keep moving forward. Wallowing would not help Konoha. However, she regretted this. Regretted not seeing the seeds of treason in her old teammate. Regretted her part in those seeds germinating. They hadn't known. But they should have. Shadows coalesced before them into men, blades gleaming in the mid-afternoon light. Neither she nor Homura moved, even as several more appeared behind them. There was no escape from their fate. Both had known at the moment Dansu had driven his sword into Sarutobi's heart. As much as they had agreed with Dansu's criticisms of the third, he knew they would never abide by his betrayal here. Koharu raised her head, held her eyes firmly open in the face of death. Behind her killers, upon the rooftop in the distance, a glimmer of white in the sun caught her eye. A white snake, carefully making its way down from the side of Sarutobi's battle with Orochimaru. Dansu had already turned his attention to the fleeing Jiraiya. Nobody besides her had seen it. Blades fell upon her in a flurry, and Yuta Tenkoharu died knowing that one way or the other, she would be avenged. Jiraiya staggered into the clearing, ragged, gasping breaths shattering the tranquility. If he had the energy, or perhaps if his mind hadn't been a whirlwind of grief and panic and frigid rage, he'd have whistled at the level of destruction that had been wrought here. Sand covered the area. Jiraiya could see it across plants and bushes, caught between leaves and stuck in every possible crevice available to it. Trees had been torn from the ground and tossed wholly across the forest. Fresh pools of water occupied newly made craters scattered irregularly throughout, and in stark contrast, some isolated trees were engulfed in flame, sending plumes of thick, black smoke reaching to the sky. He shifted towards his reason for being here, wincing as his ribs reminded him they were broken. Naruto lay on the floor, having clearly passed out on his feet. His opponent, Gar, was several feet away, similarly unconscious but covered in his own blood. Even in the dire circumstances, the Sannin couldn't resist a proud grin. The sealing plan had evidently not worked, and Naruto had been forced to go toe-to-toe with an out-of-control Jinchuriki. And he had won. At any other time in Konoha's history, Jiraiya would be carrying Naruto back to Konoha and to a hero's welcome. The smile faded. Ignoring the pain, Jiraiya knelt next to his apprentice and checked for any wounds. Remarkably, there were none serious enough to require immediate medical attention. Jiraiya raced through some hand seals and bit his thumb, channeling what little chakra he could afford to into summoning. Kekai, Gamma Hyoro. Hyoro burst into life next to Naruto, snapping to attention as he realized who had summoned him. The Crimson Toad glanced sideways at Naruto and started, concern flashing across his face. Kami Jiraiya-kun. I'd heard the kid had summoned Bunasama for a fight. Jiraiya raised a hand, cutting off the talkative toad before he could build up a head of steam. There's no time, Hyoro, we need transport to Mount Myaboku. And fast. The toad gave him a once-over and his eyes widened almost imperceptibly when he noticed the state of the Sannin. Say no more, Jiraiya-kun. I'll have you both there in a flash. The toad opened his mouth to begin the jutsu that would transport Jiraiya and Naruto into its stomach, but a weak voice halted them. Wait. Jiraiya turned to the source of the noise, the Tsunejin Jinchuriki, and frowned as the boy began to drag himself to his feet. Gar, is it? Be very careful. My apprentice here graciously spared your life despite your intention to slaughter his friends and neighbors. I'm in no mood for such mercies. I am beaten, the boy said wearily, exhaustion weighing heavily on his voice. I have no intention of fighting anymore. Then what is it you want? Speak quickly, Jiraiya demanded. The demon. This is the first time in a long time. I can't hear it. There is peace in my mind. He mentioned you were a seal master? Jiraiya felt pride well up inside him so explosively he thought he might burst, and he couldn't resist a glance at his sleeping apprentice. Of course you tried to help him, even while he tried to kill you. Fool boy. He turned his attention back to Gaara. There has been a coup in Konoha. It's no longer safe for Naruto to be here. Get yourself and your siblings away. You'll have to come find us. It won't be easy and I can't make any promises, but I will do what I can to help you with your burden. With that, Jiraiya turned back to Naruto and Hyoro began to prepare his jutsu once more. Just as he and Naruto were being drawn into the toad, Jiraiya caught two rasped words from the boy they were leaving behind. Thank you. Asuma darted through the trees, carefully controlling his pace despite the adrenaline and fury flowing through him. Now was not a time for the rash impulsiveness that had dominated his youth. He needed to rein himself in. Life must come before blood. Azuma-sensei, should we really be leaving Sasuke and Kakashi-sensei? They're going back to the village. He turned to glance at Ino, eyes full of fear and confusion, and was filled with empathy for the young girl. She would be a true shinobi with time, but her entire life had collapsed today. It had been battle enough to stop her from heading back to Konoha in search of her mother and father. Kakashi-sensei knows what he's doing, Shikamaru responded, eyes tight and hard. It wouldn't surprise me if he already had a plan. Sasuke too for that matter. Shikamaru is right, he said firmly. And even if Kakashi didn't have a plan, we'd be better off fleeing in different directions and making it harder for a route to track and pursue us. The more groups and directions that we break off into, the wider they have to cast their net. And the bigger the cracks we can slip through are, Shikamaru finished for him. But why are they going through so much effort to find us all? We're only Jinan. Ino asked, and Asuma realized she was even more stressed than she was letting on. Ino was more than bright enough to connect the dots. Because you are the heirs to Konoha's major clans, Asuma answered. You may not be powerful shinobi in your own right now, but if Dansu can control the clan heirs, he can control the council. Both now, And in the future, no clan head will want to risk their heirs in open defiance. So the more of us escape, the more tenuous Dansu's hold on power will be? Shikamaru asked, and Asuma nodded. Ino was quiet for a moment, before muttering, and that's not even counting how easily someone can be turned if you press the right buttons, turn the right screws. Her voice trailed off, and Asuma knew that she was crying without even having to look. We'll find a way to save him, Ino. I swear we will. Shikamaru's voice was iron-hard, but Asuma knew well the fear that it hid. Asuma said nothing in response. He was too old, too steeped in the world of shinobi. He couldn't make the promises or give the reassurances that Ino and Shikamaru wanted from him. The absence of it reverberated between the three of them like an explosion, and the silence screamed terribly in their ears. They ran. A gentle, rhythmic clacking echoed through the corridor at the top of the Hokage tower. Naturally, his footsteps that should accompany that sound were silent. Dansu enjoyed the sound his cane made. Those who knew him feared him. Those who didn't underestimated him because of it. He killed those people. Torune, what is the status of the hunt for our missing men? He asked, voice dangerous, low. Teams 12 and 14 have been found. The Genon have been brought back to the village. Their senseis, regrettably, were killed during the retrieval. Am I to understand then, Torune, that the search for teams 8 and 10 have been unsuccessful? He asked, squeezing his cane tightly in his hand, turning his knuckles white. He knew the answer. Had it been otherwise, Torune would have been tripping over himself to give the good news. Yes, Dansu-sama. Sarutobi Asuma has managed to kill at least 4 of our trackers and seriously wound 2 others. Team 8's trail has run cold after crossing the border into Kiri, though we found evidence that Team 9's Rock Lee is traveling with them. Dansu nodded slowly. It was good that the boy hadn't disappeared entirely. His showing in the Chunin exams proved his potential. Team 9's situation truly was unfortunate. Might Guy was too enamored with Hiruzen's ways and, like many others loyal to the previous regime, had attempted to fight his way out of the village. His attempt had failed, though he managed to create enough of a commotion that the boy Rock Lee managed to slip through their fingers. Guy would not be turned, and Dansu knew well enough that trying would be a waste of effort, and his attitude had spread to his students. Even so, Dansu had never been one to throw away a potentially valuable tool, and the Genon could be turned to his cause, even after the damage Dansu had been forced to inflict upon their sensei. All things said and done, his ascension to power was always going to have been a bloody affair. The losses had been inevitable, a price worth paying. But he needed to act decisively now to secure his position, to secure Konoha's position. Especially as Konoha was missing its Jinchuriki, spirited away as he had been by Jiraiya. The tracking seal he had placed inside the boar using his blade all those months ago was useless while he was with the toads. But Dansu would know as soon as he returned, and the boy would be taught how to properly wield that power of his in Konoha's service. If he didn't, Dansu would simply rip it out of him and give it to someone who could. Torune, once the confirmation ceremony is complete, muster the Jonin. I have indicated my willingness to Suna to discuss peace terms. We will use this opportunity to wipe the village from the map. You have command of the operation. Kill them all. A moment passed. Civilians, Dansu-sama? Dansu's eyes narrowed. Now is not the time for cowardice and hesitation, Torune. The other villages will be looking for a chance to strike at us, and we cannot afford to look weak. Scour Sunagakure from the maps, eradicate every man, woman and child. Show the world what it means to cross Konoha with Shimura Dansu as its Hokage. Hi, Hokage-sama. Torune flickered away to begin carrying out his orders, and Dansu paused in front of a set of heavy oaken double doors leading the roof of the tower, where his inauguration as the 5th Hokage was about to take place. For Konoha. He strode through the door, the red and white robes of office flowing out behind him, and emerged out into silence, suddenly flanked by a pair of Anbu. There were no cheers, only hundreds of kneeling shinobi below. That was fine. He had known that he would never be loved, never be appreciated in the way that Hiruzen had been. But under him, they would be strong. Konoha would thrive. Dansu reached the railing and gazed out upon the village that was finally, his. He smiled. Civilians and shinobi of Konoha, the masked Anbu to his right called out, "It is my honor to present Konoha's 5th Hokage. Kakashi, we need to move." Hatake Kakashi forced himself not to roll his eyes at Onko's words. He understood the need for speed, for urgency. But understanding didn't stop the bile from rising to the back of his throat, nor did it still his trembling hands. Leading his team into a life-or-death battle he could handle with easy indifference. He was there to protect them. What he was about to do was anathema to everything that he stood for. She's right, Kakashi-sensei. Sasuke's voice drove the kunai deeper, and he let his lone eye gaze out into the murky forest gloom that surrounded them. They were a good distance north from the village, in a small, secluded clearing in the forest. As careful as they had been not to be followed, there could be no guarantees. They were both right. "You're sure about this, Sasuke? And you, Sakura?" The pair stood across from him, beside a tree. Sasuke's Sharingan gleamed in the dark, tracing subtle flows of chakra in the air in a way that his never could. He looked calm and composed, more certain than Kakashi had ever seen him. Sakura stood beside him, face as serious as it was afraid, and yet she seemed more resolute than even the Uchihas. "It's like you said," she started, "Dansu won't ever trust you. It's only a matter of time before you're taken care of if you stay." "And the mission?" he asked. "No one would blame you if you wanted to just keep your heads down until something is done about Dansu?" "Screw that," Sasuke spat, with such venom that Kakashi's lone eye widened in surprise. "Those that abandon their comrades are worse than scum. That's the one, ironclad rule you taught us and the rule that Itachi and now Dansu have broken in the worst way possible. We won't stand by and wait while others bring him down for us." "I won't be dead weight again," Kakashi sighed. They had grown so much in such a short time. They would have to grow a lot more in the days and months and years ahead of them. In the shinobi world, growing normally meant pain. And now, they would be doing it without him there to help. "Fine. Take as few risks as possible. We have no idea how long you will need to be in place for, and if Dansu suspects any disloyalty he won't hesitate to stamp it out. I'll get in touch with you to arrange how we will transfer information. From this point on, you can only trust each other inside the village, and even then, beware of any deception." "Hi, Sensei," they echoed, and Kakashi nodded approvingly. "Hokage, we really need to get moving," Anko ground out, patience wearing thin. He turned back to her and the girl, Ken, that would be their third traveling companion, and nodded. "Be safe, Kakashi-sensei," Sakura half-whispered, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "Protect each other, you two." Sasuke smiled then and looked him dead in the eye. "Don't worry, Sensei. I won't allow my comrades to die, I'll protect them with my life." Kakashi's lone eye curved into a smile, but his heart soared as he heard his own words repeated back to him. "Good to hear. Team 7, the true Team 7, you are hereby disbanded until such a time as we can reunite a shinobi of Konoha under their rightful Hokage. Good luck, both of you." Moments passed and suddenly, the clearing was empty, no trace of it ever having been occupied remaining. Naruto gazed out across the seething jungle that belonged to the Toads, wrapped heavily in bandages and fists clenched white-knuckle tight. He had won. Saved the village from a murderous Jinchuriki, and yet, it was meaningless. The third was dead, and his killer wore the Hokage's hat. Just the thought of it turned his stomach and set his eyes burning with the beginnings of tears. Behind him, Jiraiya landed softly on the cliff edge that Naruto had perched himself upon. If anything, the old pervert was in a worse state than he was, which still made him real. Jiraiya had always seemed invincible to him. Naruto had never even once gotten close to landing a blow upon his master. Whatever fight Jiraiya and the third had been in on that rooftop must have been unreal. Whatever questions he might have had, he kept them to himself. Jiraiya wouldn't talk about it, and Naruto wouldn't dream of prodding at wounds that raw. "Sensei. Gaki. How are you holding up?" Naruto shrugged his shoulders, "About as well as you'd expect. Physically fine, I guess." "Good. We haven't got time to waste. I've been checking in with a few of my sources. Akatsuki are on the move, which means you need to be ready. Itachi seems to believe they're preparing to move for the Baijuo. You have 2 years at most." "What about the village?" Naruto asked, trying to ignore the flutter of panic that vibrated through him at the thought of being hunted by the group. "Don't misunderstand me when I say this, Naruto. I want to wring Dansu's throat more than anybody in the elemental nations, but the damage Akatsuki could do with 9 of the Baijuo. This is bigger than just Konoha." Naruto took a deep breath as fear became something else. Resolve. Resolve, and the faintest spark of an idea. "Fuck that." "Oh?" Jiraiya asked, eyebrow raised. "You say I've got 2 years? Fine. I'll become so damn strong in 2 years that I'll be able to stop Akatsuki and take the village back from Dansu. Konoha is our home. I won't stand by and let it suffer no matter what." "And what makes you think you can get that strong in just 2 years, Gaki?" Jiraiya asked. His tone was disbelieving, yet Naruto felt that there was something else there, or perhaps it was the absence of something. It didn't matter. Naruto clenched his fist and looked his master dead in the eyes. "Because I won't be alone. I have a plan." Jiraiya smirked, his first smile since they had arrived here. A plan? Now, this I have to hear. Naruto began to speak, and when his idea wasn't immediately shot down by his master, he felt a tingle of excitement rush across his skin. He spoke, and Jiraiya made adjustments as he did so, and the tingle grew into a rush of adrenaline as the enormity of what he wanted to achieve set in. His village had been taken from him. His home, and the home of everybody he cared about. He was going to take it back for them, even if it killed him. The sun rose over the border of Mizunokuni much the same as it had upon the jungles of Mount Myaboku for the past 2 years. Of course, here there were no flies to contend with, and the sticky humidity was blissfully absent, but it was much the same experience at its core. The first tickle of warmth kissed his back, fighting away the night's cold, and Naruto could sense almost immediately the change in the world around him. With the sun's warmth, came life bursting out of every pore of the forest he was meditating within. Every creature for miles reacted to the return of the light, from the birds in the trees, dipping and diving between the branches and undergrowth for the day's first meal, all the way down the tiniest of insects, scuttling amongst the decaying foliage on the floor. A single inch too could contain more life than the whole elemental nations had people, and if he concentrated, he could sense each and every one. It was more than meager awareness, he could feel their life force, connect with it in a way that was beyond his capability to describe. Stretching out his awareness as far as he could was humbling. Millions of lives, each full of passionate energy and determination to survive, and he was but one of them. Little more than a grain of sand on a beach, just trying not to be washed away with the tide. Of course, if he chose to, he could change that. 2 years of training had allowed him to tap into the natural energy around them and mingle it with his own, augmenting the chakra he possessed naturally with the natural energy of the surrounding creatures. The process was dangerous, and even after 2 years of work, he could only focus the tiniest amount of the energy sage chakra and use it safely. But even that was enough to increase his strength dramatically, enough that Jiraiya had even confirmed he could fight on a level with some Jonin if only for a short time. Suddenly, Naruto twitched, breaking his near-perfect stillness. As though merely speaking the man's name was enough to summon him, the older man had left their camp, and was ambling easily towards the clearing Naruto had chosen for his morning meditation. Naruto bit back a wave of sour irritation and tried to refocus, but he couldn't find the same level of calm as he had achieved before. With a frustrated click of his teeth, he hopped to his feet and stretched deeply, trying to shake off the stiffness in his muscles as his master approached. What will it be today? Training or target? Minutes passed until Jiraiya finally strode into the clearing, his face so hard it could have been carved from stone. It was an expression that had become all too commonplace since Dansuku. Naruto never thought he would miss his teacher's exuberance, but now when it appeared, it only did so as a paper-thin veneer. A mask so brittle that when Jiraiya wore it, Naruto thought he could see the cracks appearing on its surface. Target it is. Sensei, Naruto said, unable to keep a hint of shortness from his voice. Brat. Jiraiya replied. The toads have sent word the hit is happening today. It's time to move. Naruto swore quietly and hopped to his feet, heart rate already climbing at the thought of moving into water country proper. Before anything else though, Naruto sent a ripple of chakra pulsing across his skin, the smallest he could manage with the enormous reserves he had at his disposal to fill for the seals holding the vast majority of his ninja equipment tattooed, invisible until activated, upon his skin. As usual, he was well prepared for pretty much anything. Without a fixed home to return to, he and Jiraiya needed to be prepared to fight for their lives at pretty much any time. Even Mount Myaboku itself wasn't entirely safe, and over the 2 years that had passed since leaving the village, he and the toads had fought off several missing nin hired to capture or kill him and Jiraiya from both Akatsuki and Dansu. Do we know how turbulent things are along our route? He asked his sensei, whose frown deepened at the question. Not as well as I would like. Kiranin from both sides of the civil war are on high alert for outside threats since we leaked them information about Akatsuki's plans for the Sanbi. We're probably heading into a fairly volatile situation, so prepare yourself. Naruto nodded, but winced internally. The war in Mizu after the death of the 4th Mizukage had begun explosively, with the two sides fighting several brutal pitched battles where hundreds had died. However, as either camp entrenched themselves into defensive positions, the nature of the conflict shifted. Mizu Shinobi specialized in stealth and assassination, and soon, most offensives launched by both sides were under the cover of thick, chakra-laden mists that would cover a defensive position. Then, blades and assassination jutsu would flash forth from the gray at opportune moments, stealing the life of their victim and disappearing back into the mist as quickly as they had appeared. Men and women died in their sleep, poisoned or throats cut as they tried to catch a few desperate hours of rest. By all accounts that had reached their ears, conditions on the front lines, whilst physically acceptable, were exacting a hard toll on the psyche of the shinobi stationed there. Strange shinobi would not be welcomed by anybody, least of all foreign missing ninja. "I'm ready, sensei." Jiraiya glanced him over before turning towards the trees. "Follow me closely, there's no guarantee this isn't a trap." They took to the trees, cold air whipping past Naruto's cheeks. It had been a while since they had moved so openly, and for a moment, Naruto had to strain to keep the deep red blur that was his sensei within his sights. He soon found his rhythm, however, and began matching Jiraiya stride for stride, their sandals barely kissing the pinewood tree branches before a chakra-fueled leap took them to the next. Naruto allowed himself a moment to enjoy the feeling of moving freely, of action, his heart soaring as he breathed in the crisp morning air through his nose. Of course, the familiar nerves and tension of leaving on a mission lingered at the back of his mind, and despite the surging joy that had brought a wide grin to his face, his eyes still scanned their surrounding intently, looking for even the slightest hint of danger. Even knowing that they were walking into an active war zone could not dampen the joy, though, it felt so damn good to be doing anything once again. "Do we know we're up against?" Naruto called out to Jiraiya as he pulled level with the older man. Jiraiya shook his head. "My informant tells me it's not one of the main group, but given the target, I wouldn't be surprised if we're walking into an S-class clusterfuck. If one of them do show up, you get away," Naruto groused, eyes rolling before he could stop them. "I know, sensei. Though at this point I don't see why I should run away and leaving you to fight two fully fledged Akatsuki by yourself. I'm strong enough to help." Jiraiya snapped to a halt so fast Naruto nearly leapt right past him, and rounded on Naruto with such intensity that he thought his sensei was about to hit him. Instead, Jiraiya's hands grabbed his shoulders and shoved him back against the tree they had stopped upon. "Kami Naruto, it's not about how strong you are." Jiraiya was half-iling, and Naruto's protests died on his tongue as he caught a peculiar intensity in his master's eyes, an edge he'd never seen before. "We're long past doubting your strength. Even I have to admit your progress is incredible. Then why don't you trust me to help more? I'm not asking you to let me be reckless, I know how important it is to keep the Nine Tails away from the Akatsuki. But I can use it to help stop them. If not, what else is it for?" "Trust," Jiraiya began, but hesitated, and his grip on Naruto's shoulders loosened. "Naruto, if I were to have to fight Dansu tomorrow, there isn't a single shinobi I'd trust more than you to have my back, save perhaps Kakashi or Tsunade, if I could convince her. It isn't a question of trust, or your strength." "Then what is it a question of, sensei?" "We have been training, hidden for 2 years, breaking ourselves myself all to be kept hidden away on the mountain, doing nothing while a usurper, a traitor, wears the old man's hat. You keep telling me we can't move against Dansu because the Akatsuki are more important a threat now they are on the move, but outside of a few minor missions like this one, you've not let me do anything to stop them either." Naruto took a few heavy breaths and fixed his sensei with the steeliest glare he could manage. "You say that you trust me, that you believe I've become strong, but your actions say something else entirely." For just a moment, his master's shoulders sagged, but it was such a subtle movement Naruto thought he might have imagined it. Jiraiya stepped away, turning back towards the trees laying between them and their target. "Enough of this, brat, we've wasted too much time already. When you agreed to become my apprentice, you agreed to accept my judgment regarding your training and how quickly it progresses, and gave up any right to question it." Naruto scowled, frustration bubbling up inside, but he quashed it. His master was right, after all. He had made that agreement all those years ago, albeit without truly knowing what he was agreeing to. The master-slash-apprentice relationship was hugely different from that of a Jonin sensei and their Jonin squad. It was a close, personal bond. A Jonin and their Jonin were commander and subordinate first and foremost, though the training of Jonin was a main responsibility of their Jonin sensei. An apprenticeship was the same way, but the relationship between the two was far closer, more like family than comrades, with its own set of rules and expectations. Naruto had no right to question Jiraiya's decisions, at least while he was apprenticed to him. Suddenly, Jiraiya turned back, the hardness gone from his eyes. "But when this is done, Naruto, we will talk. Properly. You may not have the right to answers, but you sure as hell deserve them." Naruto's mouth hung open as his prior frustration bled away. Answers. Perhaps even a chance to convince Jiraiya to make even a small move against Dansu. Even the hint of an opportunity to start wresting control of Konoha from that bastard was enough to set his heart thundering in his chest with excitement. He kept his smile small, and his nod respectful as he followed Jiraiya into the trees. "Thank you, sensei. The last 2 years had felt like an eternity, watching helpless as Dansu solidified his grip upon Konoha and Hi no Kuni as a whole. But perhaps, finally, it was time for them to fight back. That's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on my other social media accounts. Anime God here, and I'm signing off.